Welcome to the Leaders of B2B podcast, a weekly show where we bring you interviews and in-the-weeds expertise with today's B2B experts and thought leaders. You can see more about today's episode and guest by visiting our website at leadersofb2b.com.
We're here at day 2, Content Marketing World. Amy Higgins, the Director of Content Marketing at Cloudflare. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we were talking a little bit off air here on the floor about integrative planning.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that you are passionate. I don't know if it's near and dear to your heart, but you're definitely passionate about it because this is something
Keeps my blood pumping. Does that count?
It does. It does. And it's something that you've been trying to implement at a few different places. So why don't we talk about, like, from those who are listening who don't really understand what integrated planning means. I think they understand integrated marketing, but like from a high level perspective, like what does that mean and what is the importance of it?
It means having everybody together in a room when you start the planning, not doing it piecemeal when you pass the baton, but how do you work together to achieve the same goals at the same time on the same team, even if you're on different teams.
And this is like within the marketing side. So I just had a conversation where we were talking about the conflicting problems between sales and marketing, which is one thing, but this is almost like when you are within the marketing lens or under the umbrella and everyone's like going in different directions, right? And so this is just like the integrated part is like getting everybody together, one simple, maybe not simple, but like one path forward and everything aligns with that. And you were telling a story, and we don't have to talk about company names, where it was just, why don't you share the story where you were talking about how you were doing content for SEO, but it wasn't really helping with the overall marketing plan. It was the end user. So why don't you share that example?
Yeah. So our blog team, which reported to me, the metrics for the blog reported on the organic side of the house, the digital organic. They were focused purely on growth. So let's get 9 times the traffic goal. The problem was the SEO targets that they were looking at and the topics that we wrote about were for the end user, not for the buyer and purchaser. So we got all this traffic in, but it went nowhere. I would say maybe 0.01% of the people who landed on our blog actually moved to the next step. And only from our leads of that 0.01%, only about 9% ever converted to anything.
So let's reverse engineer this a little bit. Let's play a little revisionist history and like, how can you, like, what could have been done? Like if you were starting, and it sounds like you're doing it a little bit right now at Cloudflare, which is great. So you can share examples if you want or not, but like, how could have that been avoided? Because, there's always like things that you've had to deal with in the past. You had to deal with the pandemic. You had to deal with changing of executive teams, layoffs, things like that. It's easy in theory to have an integrated planning approach when everyone's in line, but like when you have people leaving, other people coming back, new executives, how do you think you should just like keep everybody together and on the one step forward, same path?
You need one message and one goal that everybody aligns to. So you could have a goal that's ACV and how do we increase our ACV value, but then you have to break it apart on all those channels. So if you're going to increase ACV value, how do we get people in the funnel? That's where organic comes in. And then you ask, how do we get the right people in the funnel that will actually go down the path? So it's really looking at having a singular goal that everybody's directed to, and then what do they contribute to that goal to move it in the right direction? Okay,
so let's say in a perfect world, everything's going really swell with integrated planning.
That exists.
Well, maybe
it will in a year.
But then you have to deal with enabling the sales team. Right. So like, how do you ensure that, okay, we've got the marketing, the team we're swimming all in the right direction. We're loving what we're doing. But then you have sales coming in this big wave, just rocking everybody to the side because they have the ACV goals. They will potentially maybe use the content incorrectly. I don't know. Like, how do you align with sales in an integrated approach?
So you talk about sales as a post-marketing activation.
I love it. Okay.
They're not.
Yes.
They're a pre, during, and post. One of the key people who talks to the end buyer is our sales team. So as marketers, why aren't we engaging with the sales team and saying, okay, we're losing, go back to that first example, we're losing 91% of our inbound traffic. Why is that? What's the barrier to entry? Why do people not want to purchase us? What don't they like about us? What is the other option? For that example, we had the wrong audience coming in. But for other examples, I've had them where they get stopped up because of the language we use. You say the word platform to somebody and they immediately hear money. They're like, oh, I have to spend all my money to you. So for sales, they never said buy our platform. They were like, buy our suite of services. So if you change that in marketing, then all of a sudden we had higher conversions. How to go back to your original question, you bring sales at the beginning, you bring them in as reviewers throughout the content creation, and then you also work with enablement at the end.
Mm-hmm. You are speaking to an ex-sales individual who...
Oh, I did not know that about you.
Yeah, I worked almost 8 years across a few different platforms where there was not everybody swimming in the same lane who came in. And that's the conversation we were having earlier. Is sales and marketing need to be in lockstep from the very beginning. That has to happen in order for there to be like cohesion, proper sales, verbiage, messaging, everything. All right, let's step away from like the logistical side of things, and let's talk a little bit more about content. And this is something that, as a podcaster, as somebody who is running client strategy for our clients who are doing podcasting, about doing creative content. And when we talked about this before, you lit up a little bit. You're like, okay, this is something you guys are trying to do at Cloudflare. Like, you're trying to do it. You're not like the sexiest brand. You're doing security. Like, how, and this is, I mentioned earlier, I was talking a lot of, this is like something that's very topical where everybody wants to do creative marketing. Like, I think every marketer here like wants to do it, but they either feel beaten down from their executives. They just don't think it's going to get approved. Like, how do you think about marketing from a creative lens, like a non-sexy brand, but also how do you start that conversation with the executives, with those influencers within the business who can make it happen?
So I think a lot of it is starting, got to get the basics down. A lot of people, and I'll use podcast as an example. A lot of people are like, let's launch a podcast and make it go viral.
Yeah.
But the blog channel isn't working, or your content syndication program isn't working. So I think the first step to be creative is to be boring. And then you can say what works, what not work. This is what we're doing right. This is what we're doing wrong. These are the things that we must have. And then you can see your gaps and say, what can we play with? Say, your blog works and an executive's, oh, I don't want to break that. And you're like, what if we have some fun and do some A/B testing? What if we launch still on the blog, but a series on the blog that asks the hard questions, that interviews people that we normally wouldn't interview? What if we just test that out? It could fail. It could work. You never know until you test it. But you have to have a hypothesis of, I think that this is going to bring more people in, more traffic, and gain us more volume. And once we have that volume, then it's going to help build the boring stuff volume as well.
So it's essentially just like you're starting small, like bit by bit, test. How much of the ROI conversations comes in that though? Because one thing that we always hear is like, oh, I want to do a podcast. Yeah, great. And then someone, CMO, VP of marketing, CEO, whoever is like, okay, what's the ROI on that? Like, so how do you go about that?
You missed my ROI workshop.
I did.
So some of the things with ROI is the creation, the distribution. And a lot of times people don't look at the creation wholeheartedly. So it's internal, it's external creation, it's planning and the thought process, and the distribution is also internal and external. So looking at all that time and what the impact that you're going to have from it, not just the return on revenue, but what's the impact? And then you have that conversation. So I had a C-suite who asked me to do a podcast, or a very sexy podcast for an unsexy product. I went back and said, here's what the podcast will do for us. Here's how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take us, what goals we could meet from it. And the goals didn't match with our overall marketing goals. So then we had the hard decision. Do we need to change our marketing goals, or do we not need to do this podcast? And it took me 6 months to do that. Or no, 6 weeks. 6 weeks to do that dig in. And then when I presented it to the CEO, she's like, nope, okay, let's not do it. So you really have to say, what risk are you willing to take? And if you're not willing to take that risk, be okay with saying no.
Yeah. And that's really interesting because if you're making that investment, those marketing programs, you know this, like they shouldn't go 3 months. They need to be 6, 12 months really to see the value of it, definitely for podcasting, right? And like and that's one of the downfalls of this industry within podcasting is like a lot of times CEOs are like, we want to do a podcast, or I want to do a podcast. And they're like, okay, let's do it. But it's going to be 12 months or 18 months before we see anything. And then other priorities come into play and it falls flat on its face, or they don't realize how much of your time it takes. And so there's a lot of energy that goes into it, but it needs to be like a longer marketing program. So it's good to know that you took that time to research and do what was required before you did the presentation versus like we see a lot of marketers who are like, come to us and help us. Like this is happening, just help us. Right? Well, give us a little bit more detail. And so that's why we often spend a lot of time like doing 8 weeks.
So you did it too.
Last day, 8 weeks of preparation in detail to get set up so we know what are going to be the indicators of success. That way everyone's on the same page. Okay, so what are you hopeful for within the either marketing or content marketing landscape? You've been doing this a while. You've been coming to this for, I'm assuming, how many years has it been now, content marketing world?
10 or 11 years.
So you're on the poster.
Yeah, I'm definitely on the poster. My first speaking at Content Marketing World was 2015. So that's what I use as a date to go back. And then I missed 2016 because I was climbing Kilimanjaro.
Cool.
But I've been here every year since then.
That's a separate podcast.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you hopeful for? You've even seen, we talked about trends a little bit offwards, but we don't need to, I just want to know, like, we're going to avoid AI. We have our own things about it. But like, what are you hopeful for? Like, what do you, like, for like newcomers that come to this, what energizes you?
When we start to think about things differently. So it's not content, it's marketing. It's not lead gen, it's creating a community, creating an engaging community. So you kind of have to take the business out of it and put the fun in, and take the content out of it and just put it as, this is marketing. My friends ask me what I do. And I used to tell my dad, I was like, I write stuff. But my friends ask me, what is content? And I said, well, are you on a website? Yeah, that's content. Do you listen to podcasts? That's content. Do you watch TV? That's content. And so I go through the list and they finally go, what do you not do? And I was like, exactly. Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you for joining the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thanks
Hope it wasn't too painful. I know it was the last day in the afternoon, but thanks again. I appreciate it.
Cool.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Leaders of B2B podcast. And as always, you can see more information about this episode and all the resources mentioned at leadersofb2b.com. If you enjoyed the show, please give us a 5-star rating. This episode is brought to you by Content Allies. We help B2B companies launch revenue-generating podcasts. We schedule interviews between you and your ideal prospects and strategic partners. You show up for engaging conversations. We handle everything else. Ready to build a podcast that grows your business in just 1 hour per week? Reach out to us at contentallies.com.